Good morning, folks. This is Bob O'Brien with the Herman Press that is reporting on a very important story. Let me tell you, very important story that's going on here today. So we are here at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, and there is a nuclear test that is going on today. We are reporting on the news events of this test and going around and talking to some very important people. This is a historic event. Let me tell you, folks, this will knock your socks off. So, we're going first to the General. General?
Son, we live in a world that has bombs. Atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs. Who's gonna get them first? You? Captain Nemo? The commie Soviets? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep while cutting onions. You curse the Bambino. You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know. That Hiroshima and Nagasaki's destruction, while tragic, probably saved lives. And the existence of this H-bomb, while devastating and incomprehensible to you, is better in our hands than in Khrushchev's. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me blowing crap up. You need me blowing stuff up. We use words like containment, deterrence, strategic. We use these words as backbone of a life spent defending something. The U.S. of A. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to people who rise and sleep under the blanket of the very freedom I provide and then question the manner in which I provide it. They speak Russian, but they understand mushroom clouds and shockwaves. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a weapon and stand the post. Either way, I don't give a darn what you think.
Well, thank you very much, General, for that report. You were just irradiating with truth there, and it really chilled me to the bones, and it seemed like it did to you as well. Up next, we're going to be talking to a local fisherman who is experiencing some of the effects of the blast. And unfortunately, he might not be the happiest, but we'll see how this goes.
Konnichiwa. My name is Matasuchi Yoshi. I was a fisherman on the Fukuryu Maru, the boat that was 90 miles east of the Bikini Atoll during the nuclear test. Our crew had come from a small fishing village in Japan. One morning, we were finishing our breakfast when all of a sudden there was a boom! And the sky lit up, and there was a flash. Then it began to snow, and we didn't know what it was. It wasn't snow. I tasted it, but it had no taste. We later learned that it was coral that was contaminated with radiation. Hours after the flash, my skin began to burn. Everybody on the boat began to vomit. Days later, my hair began to fall out. I have been in this hospital since I returned. I will survive, but one of my crew members was not so lucky. And I feel like my suffering is not over. My friends and family are avoiding me in fear that I will contaminate them. No one has come to visit me in the hospital, and I fear that the life and the future that I had planned is no longer possible. I'm afraid I will not find a wife and have kids of my own. The nuclear bombs and the testing has had a big impact on my country. My wish is that we can learn from yesterday, live for today, and hope for tomorrow.
Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. They are much appreciated as the Herman Press tries to get to the bottom of this historic event. Up next, we have a nuclear physicist.
Hi everyone, I am the lead nuclear project physicist on the project, and I am here to discuss a little bit about what happened. Obviously, it didn't go well. I'm sitting here by myself. I don't really have a lot of friends. I don't necessarily have anyone who envies me or thinks highly of me whatsoever. So let's get into it. The Yankee 1 test on May 4th was postponed. We did learn a lot from the previous Bravo test, as this was going to be a similar warhead as previously exploded. This test was a deliverable hydrogen bomb using solid lithium duratide, and it was tested by the United States on Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. By missing an important fusion reaction, we, the scientists, grossly underestimated the size of the explosion. So our predictions were a little off. We predicted the yield to be about 5 megatons, but in fact, Bravo yielded 14.8 megatons. So this was a little bit of a difference. This made it the largest U.S. nuclear test ever exploded. The blast created a crater that was more than a half-mile wide and several hundred feet deep, and ejected several million tons of radioactive debris into the air. Within seconds, the fireball was nearly 3 miles in diameter.
Thank you very much for that report. And just a joke for you fans out there, what's a nuclear physicist's favorite food? It's fish and chips, of course. Last but not least, we are going to be going to a victim from this situation. They were unfortunately caught within the blast radius. This is a very somber portion of the episode where we will see what happened, some of the effects of the nuclear explosion.
So, I'm Amy, descendant of a nuclear blast victim. My mother was a child during the Bikini bombings. So no one was living on the Bikini Atoll in the time of the Bravo blast. However, a total of 236 people were living in the neighboring atolls of Rongelap and Utrecht, so 100 and 300 miles east of Bikini, respectively. Residents of Rongelap were exposed to as much as 200 tons of radiation. They were evacuated 24 hours after the detonation. And the residents of Utrecht, which were exposed to lower levels of radiation, were not evacuated until at least 2 days later. After their evacuation, many experienced typical symptoms of radiation poisoning: extreme thirst, burning of the mouth and eyes, nausea, diarrhea, loss of hair, and skin lesions. 10 years after the blast, the first thyroid tumors began to appear. Of those under the age of 12 on Rongelap at the time of Bravo, 90% have developed thyroid tumors. In fact, I have my mother's tumor right here. In 1964, the U.S. government admitted responsibility for exposing the islanders to radiation and appropriated funds to compensate them. Today, there are like 5,000 Bikinians living throughout the Marshall Islands, and many want to return to their native island. But the appropriations from the U.S. government have not been enough to completely eradicate the radiation and do a proper cleanup. So they're still waiting.
And thank you for that last report. That was very informative. It seems like we're ending just on time as they're getting ready for another blast. Which, folks, we would not want to be caught in that.
Firing time, and I have just been 30 seconds. That's the voice of the control set marking the seconds remaining. The final switches have been thrown. No one can stop it. The atomic bomb is about to explode. How it will sound, 20 seconds. We do not know how it's going to sound, but 42,000 men here are watching. All of the observers, 10 seconds.
Oh no. The blast is coming sooner than we thought, folks. This is not looking good.
Of the observer ships are in position in the open sea. We're about 10 miles Three, two, one.
And that concludes our show, folks. That's all.
All right, welcome to this week's History Maker Madness. The round 2 votes are in, and we're moving to round 3 into the Sweet 16. We're going to highlight a few matchups for you in the third round. So I'm going to look at Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. This is an interesting matchup to me because it's the teacher against the student. Martin Luther King Jr. used a lot of Gandhi's nonviolent practices that Gandhi was using in India's fight against colonialism. And so it'll be interesting to see who wins this matchup. Miss Barry, who are you looking at in the villains section this week?
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, and I'm glad that you're pointing out that I'm sticking with the villains. I have decided to look at Hitler versus Bin Laden. I'm sticking with the bad boys, so let's see what you guys think. How about you, Mr. Hargrove?
Well, I'm going to look at the lost and found match. That would be John Locke, who is the famous English philosopher that influenced American democracy and was also a star on the ABC series Lost, versus Martin Luther, who was part of the Protestant Reformation and believed he found the true way to God. And Mr. Adams, what do you have this week?
Yeah, so in the last round, Neil Armstrong was upset. Space lost to Spruce, so Spruce is moving on to go off against Jacques Cousteau, the marine explorer. And so this matchup, we're looking at Spruce versus Coos. Lose?
All right, going to politicians. We're looking at the matchup between Abe Lincoln and Winston Churchill. Churchill was Prime Minister of Great Britain and helped lead them to victory during World War II. Abe Lincoln obviously led the nation through its biggest moral, constitutional, and political challenge thus far. So this is the Battle of the Hats, the boiler versus the top hat. Thanks for joining us.